Great, are we live?
Yep, we are live.
Okay. Greetings, everybody. Hi, thank you for joining us for today's Performance IQ webinar, which is the second in our series covering scale and automation in game performance management. I'm Michael Baylor, I'm the CMO of GameBench, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. In our previous session, we dug into how the SDK, in tandem with gameplay, automation, and device forms, transforms the role and effectiveness of performance testing and analysis. Today, only a few weeks later, we're taking a further big jump ahead to look at how the latest GameBench innovations in both the SDK itself and also the associated web dashboard have once again moved the needle for DevOps and QA. Now, for those of you who are new to us, I'll give the briefest possible intro so we can get straight into the subject. You can, of course, check out our website, which, as you know, is gamebench.net. So for 10 years, GameBench has been a pioneer and world leader in game performance management, and we serve two complementary markets in the industry. On one side, we provide performance analysis, benchmarking, and monitoring services worldwide to ISPs, operators, and device manufacturers. On the other, we deliver performance testing and monitoring software and services to leading game developers and publishers. So that's what we do. And as you can see from the chart, which I think Andrew will hopefully have up, let's just have a quick look. Yep, as you can see from the famous chart, we are already, we are winning significant clients across the entire ecosystem, which of course is very pleasing. That's the corporate bit over and done with, short and sweet, as always. My colleague, Andrew Fester, who is our product manager on SDK and the web dashboard, will be running this presentation. But before I hand over to him, just a couple of quick points about how we're running today's session. You'll have plenty of questions, we hope, and we'll be responding to them as we go along. So put them into the chat as soon as you like, as we go. We don't do questions at the end, we do them as we go along because we like to pick them up fresh. So put them into the chat as soon as you like, and we'll aim to bring you in live into the discussion to discuss them with Andrew and to some extent myself and perhaps other members of the audience. So be ready to become an instant panelist after you've placed your question. We'll invite you to unmute and invite you to ask your question if you are comfortable doing that. We're going to wrap pretty promptly on the hour, as we always do. And if you don't get a chance to discuss your question with us, please do contact us after we close. We'd love to hear from you. Right, that is enough from me. Andrew, my friend, over to you.
Thanks, Michael. As Michael said, I'm Andrew. I'm the product manager for the sort of studio side of the GameBench offering. I've done one of these webinars before. I'd like to sort of mention a little bit what happened in the previous webinar, because there's some topics that I want to build upon from the last time we did the webinar. So in the last webinar, the focus was to show off device farm automation. And we worked with Game Driver from the automation side and Source Labs for the device farm. And we put our own SDK into the app that we were going to test. Towards the end of that, we did a dig through the data, and then I made a guess at what might be the problem. In that webinar, I was pulling the data from our GameBench server and creating a spreadsheet and highlighting issues. In this webinar, which is slightly different, I want to stay more inside the GameBench tool set and show off what we can do around release decisions. And a part of my methodology, I will be using a device farm again and the SDK. So to start with the absolute basics, from QA perspective, we want to be creating data that allows you to say whether something has passed or failed a requirement. Now, from a game feature perspective, does the character move or does it not move? Very simple, pass, fail. Whereas with performance, you are collecting a range of metrics, and I would describe that being on a very analog scale, whereas pass or fail is a very digital decision. It's either one or the other. So how do we collect performance data and make a decision from the QA standpoint as to whether something's good to go or not good to go? So if I was to take the game performance and then put that against the device capability, as we have more and more powerful devices, you would expect the game to perform better and better. Now, if we were to try and release this game, we'd be expected to cover the whole range of performance. And that's not feasibly possible, because there are some devices that are just so old that they're not going to perform well. Even like you'd have to sacrifice so much within the game in order to cover every single device. So this is what I'm describing here as unplayable experience. Now, this could be that the certain animations in the game are just so slow, you're getting 1 or 2 frames per second, user input is not even being registered. The gamer is not having a good time and will most likely uninstall the app and probably never install again. Now, the reason why this is important is to make these distinctions is if we just want to target really good devices, what actually happens is we miss out on, so this blue line here, that what I'm just showing here, is that on the left, we have the device capability of really good devices. However, less people are going to have the flagship devices. And as devices get older, more and more people have picked up secondhand devices or kept hold of the flagship device. So over time, the devices with lower quality are going to have the higher number of devices. So what we're doing here is, if we define a point at which the gameplay is unplayable, there is going to be this section highlighted here of users that can't play the game. Now, as we move that line unplayable experience further right and lower the minimum capability of the device that we can support, obviously we're going to lose out on less and less potential customers. So questions that we need to now ask from setting up a QA process is, how do we define this line? How do we define this line as far as performance is concerned? And I guess a question for the business as well is, like, how much of the player base are we potentially missing out on? And should you then make a decision to sacrifice quality of the game in order to access more devices, or whether that decision to reduce the quality goes against the selling point of the game? So what we're trying to do here is define a pass-fail point that we can now start to work with on a repeat basis. Now, this isn't so simple as this, because in reality, we can tier devices. We can treat high-performing devices mid-tier, or however many tiers you want to have, but you can group devices based on their generalized performance. And you can treat that in 2 ways. First of all, from a developer side of things, you could use different assets to create different versions of the same game that would naturally work better on, like, so you'd have your HD graphics on your top performing devices, your slightly older devices, maybe some reduce the quality of some of your assets, and this would mean that you'd keep your performance levels much higher. From a testing perspective, ignoring what you could do to change the app, you could say that you accept that really good devices are going to be good, and categorize them mid-tier, and set different passable thresholds that you're willing to accept within each group. Because there could be, for example, a mid-tier device that really should be performing much better or equivalent to other mid-tier devices, and might be a problematic device, and that might be it might be underperforming purely for some functionality that's being used is not well supported on that device. And that's something useful to feed back to development. So what does this do to our chart before? So from the development side, what we're aiming to do by providing different assets into different versions of the game is to move this unplayable experience line right. So all your top tier devices, you would be using like your best graphics, best experience possible. Mid tier, if you drop the quality of your assets or focus more on optimization, then you can raise that part of the chart higher, so that actually from a performance perspective, your mid tier starts to operate a lot better. And then obviously the key part that a lot of people spend a lot of time in is obviously the low tier. How many of those devices can we get into the low tier? How far can we move that line right? So here you can start to explicitly make those sacrificial choices to encompass more possible devices.
Andrew, I've got a quick question from Osman, who I think is not a novice to GameBench webinars. We've had some good questions from before. Del, could we unmute? Oh, there's Osman, ready to ask a question. Can we unmute and,
Hey, Osman.
welcome to the webinar, Osman. Good to see you again, I think.
Hey, hi guys. Unfortunately, it's the last webinar which I wanted to attend. I will hit you up with a mail, for that video of that. So the aspects which you're presenting are very interesting, and I've actually seen this myself when I was doing investigations. So you created this tier aspect, and you got game performance and device capability. I wanted to know, say we're in the current timeline and we have like iOS 16 coming and with the iPhone 14. How far back, or what's the timeline for your metrics for your results to generate this from your high level device to your low level devices? Because from my research, what I've seen is the average age for a device to last is about 5 years. So when we do testing, we say, okay, what are our current top tier devices? And then we go back 5 years, and then we create different tiers based on the last 5 years of devices. So I want to know, what were your metrics for creating this?
So yeah, that's good. That's a good question, to be honest. What we've found from looking at device tiering in the market is everybody does it slightly differently. So I'll be showing off in a minute, Osman, some of the changes we put in place, and hopefully that should work for everyone, and then everyone will be able to define their own metrics. So the reason why everyone has different device tiers is depending on the game type, different metrics are going to be more or less important. So games like Boat Attack, which I'll be showing off, has like physics and assets to render. So CPU and GPU are things that are going to be high on the classification list. Whereas sort of other games with more static assets, or maybe like 2D, when we're not dealing with any CPU, but might have like a transactions, we're going to be dealing with like memory and being able to play the game for a long time. Also, dependent on the country that you want to be deploying to, will depend on how far back device-wise and the lowest quality devices. Some countries, there are more affordable devices in some countries, and then there are some very wealthy countries where the proportion of people with flagship devices is much higher. So so there's many factors, and that's a very bespoke decision for each individual company. So dependent on like what countries your core market is in, what nature of the game. Can I ask, Osman, what's the nature? Because you were at Derivco when we first started talking.
Yeah, now we're Games Global. So the reason why I'm asking this is generally we look at what's our global stats, for devices and what's being played and what browsers, mix device and browser mix. So I just was very interested and keen to understand, what are the metrics you're basing this presentation on, so I can understand better and see what I can implement in what I do.
So I'm using performance is in a general term, obviously dependent on the apps. If you're a web-based app, yeah, I assume you're looking at CPU, memory, and network as your core performing metrics. So then you would you would focus on those metrics. I'll show you the dashboard later, and if you wanna pop back in later onto the question, then let's see if what you see answers your question.
Thanks, Osman. Thanks.
Okay,
Jump back in as soon as you like with a further question. Andrew, thank you very much. Osman, thank you.
That's all right.
On we go.
Right, where was I? All right, so this is a decision that we can make from a development team perspective, and sort of to gain access to more of the potential market. Now let's look at from a testing perspective. It could be that you set your thresholds differently for each tier that you look at, and the reason why you might do that is so your top tier devices, you'd expect them all to be working really well. Low tier, what you're aiming to do is you're trying to match that with your unplayable line on the far right. Now your mid tier should be the majority of your devices that are going to be still performing really well. Now you want to see all of the devices that sit on the right hand side of this segment here, and what you're looking for here is devices that should be performing well against the mid tier, but if they are dropping below your expected pass-fail, then these are devices to start targeting, because you'd expect them. And because they're mid tier, they actually could correspond with support requests that come in against your app, because people expect them to work. I guess like really low spec devices, my device is really old, and what am I expecting? Game should work, doesn't work on this device, it's old. Mid tier, people still have paid good like $400, $500 for the device. We're not talking about the £1,000 or like flagship devices. People have still paid good money for the devices, so they will expect their game to be working. And I guess this is where you might start seeing value in defining this region. Now, obviously, it's not one or the other, so potentially you could have an aspect of both. And in this example here, I've set a testing threshold the same for my top and my high tier and my mid tier, but then I've dropped my spec for the low tier, because here I'm trying to like perform well in the top and mid and have a really good experience, and then basically do the best you can for the low tier. But again, here the goal is here to try and move this unplayable experience line to the right and capture more of the market. So I would like to sort of give a bit of context from a more real aspect. And what I've done is I've taken boat attack from the Unity repository using the demo island. I sort of made a guess like last time that the GPU was the bottleneck. So what I've done is tried to focus on optimisations. Now, I'm the first one to admit that I'm not an expert at optimizing games. I'm good at testing and learning methodologies. How to actually optimize a Unity game, not my speciality. However, what I've done through stepping through my versions is made changes to a game and then put it back through a test run, so we can start to see the value of the tools. I've used the GameBench SDK. However, I'm using a new tool that we have internally. It's going to be coming out soon. It's an injector that sits on your CI/CD systems, and it can inject the SDK into a pre-built APK and re-sign it, which is great for just not having to spend time getting the SDK integrated. And finally, I've been sending the injected APK up to Source Labs, using Source Labs again, just because the account is available. And then this time around I'm processing through the GameBench web dashboard rather than a spreadsheet. So just to give you an idea of like what I've done, if anyone watches the video again and wants to type out the commit ID, good luck. This is the version of Unity I was using. Made no changes in version 1. I did some static batching, found a whole bunch more for 1.02, and then I reduced the sort of shadows quality in the 3rd version just to see if that made a difference. And what I did is I just sort of built these APKs up first. I have the injector set up on our internal Jenkins. So what I do is I upload the APK, inject the SDK, and we send it off to Source Labs. And I'm roughly testing on about 80 devices. Once each test run is done, which is 30 seconds, the session is uploaded to the GameBench web dashboard. So what I'll do now is flick, instead of doing pre-baked assets, I'm going to take a look at the GameBench web dashboard. Now, for existing customers, this is new. This is what we've been working on this year. We have the capability of deciding thresholds for testing metrics that we're interested in, and then also taking a dive into those and seeing how the data is built up. Now, this might take a couple of seconds to load because I have quite a lot of data in this one.
Andrew, while we're waiting for that to load, can I ask a quick question? We had 80 devices running in the device farm for this. Have you found that that's a relatively standard kind of number, or will SDK users be possibly looking at a much larger number in certain circumstances or a much smaller number? What's the decision process in that from your point of view?
It's entirely up to your methodology. Now, if you are using your existing devices, you probably already have a set of devices that you are wanting to use. I would say that if you are looking at your device tiers, you want at least 1 to 2 devices in each tier. However, it's flexible. As long as you're happy and confident that that device tier has been tested, or whether you're not using device tiers, whether you have enough spread across the device capability, then that would make sense. Obviously, if you're using a device farm, for me, because I had access to all of it, I thought I'd just test on everything and see what I find, see what sticks. Now, all of this data for this webinar was collected over this week, basically, and this has all been automated. I've managed to record about 400 sessions. Now, for people that have used the web dashboard before, I would not want to dig through 400 sessions in our sessions tab to find issues. So here I've collected a lot of data, and I can set testing thresholds that will highlight to me where there are more or less failures. If I bring the standards down, I can start to pinpoint sessions that are problematic. So here, for example, I can just take my CPU up to like 90% and just see what's sticking. Now, obviously, before I didn't set the I didn't say that memory or CPU were an issue. I mean, I mean, 1 gig is a fairly low standard, and not many sessions realistically failed even taking it down any further. So memory is really not problematic here. Neither is CPU. 50% CPU should be manageable. I can take this down to 40 or 30, and we're only seeing minimal failures across each version. So FPS is the area that's struggling, and I suspect was the GPU was the bottleneck. So I could dig into each session that failed. Now, obviously, this is a big list because I've selected the global failure, but here I'm seeing a strong correlation. Every time FPS fails, GPU is very, very high on the right hand side. And also here we can break down into devices. and we can start to see where the failures sit. So although I have 400 sessions, I actually have only like a couple of sessions maximum on each device. But the benefit of being on a device farm obviously is I can scale up my testing quite easily, and I can start to dig into sessions that I think should work. So I mentioned in the last webinar that I thought the Pixel 5 general performance had dropped. I can start to dig into the Pixel 5. It's achieving probably what I would expect a sort of mid-tier device would. However, BoStack is kind of hard to get a good frame rate value. I wouldn't say that my optimisations have been particularly impressive. So from coming back to our problem that we've stated, we want to be finding this unplayable experience mark. Now, like, how do we even start to mark that, and like, where does that sit in how we process the data? So looking at the web dashboard now, that unplayable line, we can start to answer those questions by using the threshold specified on the left-hand side. Now, this is, I'm currently treating the full chart, so we haven't created any device tiers. So I'm going to look at all of the devices as a whole to start off with. So if I'm trying to find where it's playable, I could be looking at anything over 20 FPS. And now what I want to start seeing is looking through my devices and how many of these devices are struggling. I mean, there's still quite a lot, and you know, that could be because, let's say all the GPU is working really hard. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to 100% and negate the GPU. I know, because I just want to have a look at the frame rate to start off with. And we can start to do that now. So now I'm starting to see some ticks across the board, because this is all cumulative. This is all the errors added together to start giving you something to play with and treating all 400 sessions together rather than one session by itself. So now we have a list of devices that are going to start struggling. And let's say I'm just looking down here. Now, I said in the last one, I know I have a better feel for the Pixel devices because I have a Pixel. Samsung seems like the S7 seems to fail over the S7 Edge. So that could be the point at which, you know, the devices are starting to be problematic on the Samsung side. I suspect the Edge probably has a slightly better hardware. But again, we're starting to find where that edge point is, and start to feedback about the devices that are not working, potentially devices that might need more retesting. And, you know, so you've taken your subset of testing down to just the problematic areas.
Andrew, a couple of questions. One from Osman, which I think will probably we can place at the end. Osman will bring you back in. We also have two questions from someone who is anonymous but is new to GameBench. I'm going to just give them to you on behalf of that person. GameBench is a new topic to me, so they're new to the company. I see a lot of mobile devices there. Are other platforms supported other than mobile? And if not, are they planned to be supported in the future? That's the first question. If you can answer that, and then I'll give you the second one.
Oh, so I have to answer the first one before you'll even let me have the second question.
Well, let's see how you do with the first question. If you do well, then I'll see the second question. If not, we'll just move swiftly on and try not to look.
Okay, well, we'll just do GameBench bickering for the rest of the webinar. All right, so in our roadmap, we are looking at doing Windows SDK for next year. Now, we're just in the process of looking at our resources for that. But basically, we want to be taking the SDK onto the Windows platform. All of those platforms will then be supported on the web dashboard, so a singular platform. And then once we have the Windows SDK in place, and we'll see how that's going. We'll look into the consoles following that. However, Windows is in our roadmap, and then future plans for console down the line. And again, all looking to bring the metrics into our web dashboard. I want to look into an idea of creating comparison tools. So even if you have different source code for basically a game that looks exactly the same across the different platforms, whether there's anything that we can do to compare against those different platforms. Basically, we just want to enable a deeper level of analysis. If you are new to GameBench, and you want to talk about the features or anything that might be interested in you can drop us a message. I've got some email addresses at the end of the webinar.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Another question, I think from the same person. Can we filter in what we were just looking at? Can we filter by time period or time frame at all?
Yes, that will be coming. Initially, this first round is just the first 90 days of data, and we state it here, but we will be adding time filtering. So the use case here is we want you to be able to set up one of these. So this is a custom card that I've set up off of a default. Now, what we would do here is we would just create a new card, and like the use case that we'd be interested in here would be if you were to set up maybe the last week worth of data and the last month worth of data. So you'll be able to have two cards on your home page, and you would be able to see, any brand new failures from like the last week, and how does that compare with your your average for the month. We're trying to add some options in here to sort of tailor basically an analytics platform. So however you want to skin your data to basically give you answers very quickly out the box. I hope that answers your question.
Great job. On you go.
Where was I? Right. So on the other use case, we were bringing in device tiering. So here I'm gonna show off the sort of testing use case before. So I haven't done any modifications to target different devices. Again, I'm not a game developer, and if we were, I can set this up to give you an example. Everything else is for your experimentation. So looking at the device tiering side of things, obviously this is I showed off this creation methodology. So I've set up 3 tiers here. So basic, good, and great. These are based off of the badges that we use for our reports. Obviously, I'm using these as my basis. Obviously, it's the way that we've done our labs testing. So to give you an idea, in the great section, I put some flagship devices. Let me just refresh that. I put some of the flagship devices. So these are devices that I am wanting to basically make sure that everything is ticking, because as I said before, we expect the flagship devices to be more than capable enough to deal with most scenarios. What I'll do here again, actually, just to double check frame rate, and it's not something weird on the GPU, is I'll just negate GPU for now. And now I'll start to see some more tick boxes. Some of these devices are working very, very hard to achieve the good frame rate. That's more on the game as opposed to the device. One thing while I'm here is I will note something that I did spot here is I would expect this Pixel 6 Pro to basically be passing. I mean, Pixel 6 is passing across the board, so I would have expected the Pixel 6 Pro. And this was just something I was digging through when I was having a look and trying to show off something interesting for the webinar. If I dig into here, I have 2 sessions. One has a lower frame rate, and one has a much higher frame rate, which obviously is weird. It makes you start to doubt the methodology. However, if I load up these sessions, this session here was done on a Android 12 version, and this one here is the Android 13 version. So one cool thing here is, we're just from taking 400 sessions, device tiering, and then seeing a device that should have been performing well and clicking onto the failures, I can find that I can find a reason for something to come back to development, something to look into. So instead of just saying performance isn't great, I can actually pinpoint a device on a particular OS without even having to dig through every single session, which I think is a great way to do the analysis.
Andrew, 2 questions. How long does it take, once the user is familiar with the processes we've just gone through, how long would it take in testing in an average typical situation? How long would it take to get to that kind of insight? And the thing that I wanted to get to is until relatively recently, doing that process manually would have been extremely time intensive. How long would it take to get to those type of insights, and what would it have taken if we didn't have this tool?
If I processing 400 sessions, it could take a long time. And that's just 400 sessions because I've collected a ridiculous amount of data using the SDK. So just to give you context for those who haven't used GameBench, before this new stuff is coming out, which is coming out in about 2 weeks' time, you would basically go through the session list, and you'd work through each data point and dig through and look at each chart and make a judgment on each chart, and probably have to jot stuff down in an external tool. From a setup perspective, so that would take a long time, and you have to use an external tool to start recording your results, instead of being able to find this analysis just within the dashboard. From a setup perspective, it's actually pretty quick. We're going to make it faster. It's by no means an absolute perfect process. We do want people to start trying it though within 2 weeks, and any optimizations you feel that can be done from that, that's really going to help. So what I just did there, what I was talking, is I clicked the create a card, and I based it on the data that I've just collected for this webinar. I just create a webinar card. Let's go basic. GPU, like I said, didn't care before. I want to see if there is like a memory issue. Let's just set to this really low to flag up some errors. Let's see what the data shows. It should load in just a second. Okay, so my data is updated at the top, and I can see my memory is updated here. In fact, actually, if here, because I'm focused on memory, this isn't the usual use case, but I can start to take a look down and see if, especially from memory, like let's say I have ticks on the right-hand side in the oldest version, and I start to see failures on the left-hand side. It could mean that I'm, using more memory. Of course, in fact, there, pixel 4 might indicate there that my latest build is showing more memory. So from that's just creating cards. So I can start to dig into this within a few minutes. From learning this as a platform, it's you either have internally metrics that you want to target, or it could be that you're at the stage of trying to discover what metrics are going to be important to you. One area that you could, let's just say this just for in case we need it, you could dig into is if you want to start seeing. So I've limited my data here, and you could dig into all the sessions that happen for that particular device, because actually these are not in time order. So here you might want to you might see something interesting that you might want to take a look at. Ignore the power readings, because the devices on the device form are all plugged in. So if you plug in a device, it basically interferes with power readings. So you can start digging into that. So I would say, yes, there is a time that's going to take to build your device tiers. However, you can now use the dashboard as a way of building those tiers. So, for example, let's just take the webinar card again. And I was to come in here and I was to say, okay, well, let's start. We're going to be adding some filtering and stuff to make this a lot easier. And of course, this all works for iOS as well. Let's say I'm just going to pick a Nokia device here. How many more Nokias? Because it could be that, you know, you want to target a particular brand. Okay, that was a bad choice. Let's just use HTC because there's a couple of devices there. So only devices that you've tested will appear on the left-hand side. So this is a lot bigger than it will be if you haven't used the device farm. But it could be that you've got a local device, and then you also want to just validate data that you get from a device farm as well. So it could be that you'll look for the devices that you have locally. So here I selected the HTC. I can see that actually I'm missing some test data here because it's not showing those intermediary versions. So what I might do off the back of this is I might go run, go find this device and run it again on the device farm and get all of the version data in between. So yeah, I feel that's a really long-winded way of like giving you an idea of how quickly you can dig into this. I don't feel like I've used any specific or secret knowledge to get started with these cards or to start classifying different test cases. I kind of trust as well that, you know, from being already game QAs or devs, that you have an understanding of what your test cases are and what's regularly asked of you. And then once you have your basic what's already asked of you, then you can start adding new test cases. But if you're just looking at as generally at performance, it's hard to identify where your problem areas might be.
Andrew, thanks. Just one more quick question. As you know, we have a pretty wide user base of our manual tool, Studio Pro. Will pro users be able to take advantage of the dashboard functionality, the sort of dashboard functionality that we've been looking at? Will it fall off? What's your call on that?
Yeah, all the manual tools. So every session from the manual tools and the SDK, and then next year, Windows SDK all comes to the web dashboard, and these all feed into the same mechanism. So it doesn't matter how you record, as long as you're using the studio set tools, it'll work in the web dashboard.
While I got you, a question from GB. I'm just going to give you that question myself because we're tight on time because we've been having so much fun. The question is: my application had 3 different versions tested across different over the last 30 days across the same set of 4 devices. How could I use this card screen to have the comparison view across 3 different releases or versions?
So,
make sense?
Yep. So even in the default view will pick up all of your devices initially, and these versions are automatically detected. We're going to be adjusting, so you'll be able to adjust the length of time that will look back in data. So currently we're set at the last 90 days, but we will be able to filter very soon after initial release down to the last 30 days. So what this card will do then is pick up automatically the 3 different versions, and you will be able to see a generalized view here of all of those devices together, and then you will be able to step into the devices and see a breakdown of those failures. Now, at the moment, we don't have like diff metrics on between each card, because obviously we're looking at aggregating a lot of sessions together, so trying to make sure that that diff makes sense between different versions. We're not quite there yet, but it's definitely something that we have received from a particular customer, and is something that I'm interested in getting into here. So that would probably be the use case for your for comparing versions.
Fantastic, Andrew. Thank you. Just so you know, we've got about 15 minutes left on the session, so let's roll on. Thank you for those questions, everyone, and thanks for the great answers, Andrew.
So yeah, I covered a little bit about raising useful bugs. So that, for example, that OS bug that I saw in the Pixel 6 was a lot quicker to find that issue through this approach. And also, again, like I covered a little bit on missing data. We can see devices that have not been tested against certain versions, and potentially if they failed in an earlier version, then you definitely want to get that tested in newer versions as well. So you can start to spot holes in your data. So just to sort of tie this back to where we were looking at before, is because I feel like it sometimes goes off in a bit of a tangent, the capability of the web dashboard. What we're now able to do is define the edge of each tier and also define that unplayable region in a way that we can tweak the value till the pass fails make sense to us. Now, there's always going to be that aspect of playing a game and the user experience can be marked as unplayable, and then you'll know that that device is unplayable, or it's all dependent on the nature of your game where you put that line. But once you know where that line is, you just input it in here and repeatedly for like moving forwards, you can like make all of the other devices fall into line, and then you can start to make a pass-fail decision. You can even screenshot it for now. We are looking at doing downloadable reports so that you can archive these against releases, and you can see the performance decision that was made at that point in time. So just I've hinted on some of this. That version that I'm showing there is going to be released in approximately 2 weeks. Don't hold us exactly to 2 weeks. But we are using that as an analytics platform where we'll be building up more on top of that. So we're talking about more metrics at the top, so more pass-fail metrics that can be part of the overall pass-fail, and the ability to select metrics that are important to your particular testing. Be able to filter by OS version as well. Like as we can see, I found that issue with the Pixel 6 Pro, but being able to have that as a particular filter will just make that quicker to find those sort of issues. Device tiering is still difficult, so we want to add a bit more of an intuitive selection process for devices into the web dashboard. So we'll make it easier for you to select the correct devices for each tier. Also want to break down the versioning. I see a comment. Awesome. That's great. We also want to be able to break down the versioning. So let's say, I had like 1.01. So ideally, maybe my filtering needs to be there that I only want to filter on the major versions, not the minor versions or the big release version. So it could be that I want to see everything in all the latest ones in 2.0, but I also have the last version in 1.98 or something, the last version from the 1 series, and I want to use that as a benchmark to compare against. So we will be adding those in to select the versions that you want to be seeing on the screen. Obviously, time filters, so that you can set up a card that you could instantly look at, like a 1 week window, a month window, or it could be that you just want to see all of the data since the game has been being tested. You want to see your progress over time. To add slightly outside of that, we want to look at a notification system. We currently have alerts. We want to add to that similar to notifications on Facebook. So you can see what happened, let's say overnight, over the last week. You have notifications to say, using my cards, there are X number of new failures. That's handy, because then you can start to rely less on digging through each card. Again, we're heavily focused on making this the GameBench user a lot more streamlined. And then finally, downloadable reports, because if you've made that release decision, you want to archive that, just put that somewhere or save the decision at that point in time. what charts, what devices were tested, where were the failures, what devices to use to accept are not going to be great. All of the decisions should be added to a report, saved, so that you can go back and see, oh, if you had an issue, if you do a retrospective, you can see the data again, the decision that was made at that point in time.
Fantastic. Andrew, before we get into that, I got two more questions I'd like to try and bring in. We have a follow-up from GB, and GB is joining. Welcome. You got a follow-up question from your previous point. Would you like to jump in? Welcome. Or not? Yeah. I think you're unmuted. Would you like to ask your question? Okay, well, I'll do it for you if that's okay. So GB says, I see the comparison across versions, but I don't see the actual metrics or values. This type of comparison on a trend report is quite standard in any company that is interested in mobile app performance. We do this manually currently, but I suspect this is something a lot of clients would be interested in. Also, can we filter using a start and end date as well? Is that okay, Andrew? Clear?
Yeah, well, the last part, that makes sense. We can look at doing that.
Right.
That would make sense for a time window. So yeah, you could lock down previous 2 weeks, let's say, from a metric comparison. So here, before obviously it was on the devices, and now I'm just looking through each individual metric, if that's the breakdown here. Now you could have an average here, but this doesn't make sense because I'm aggregating lots of different devices. So here what I'm doing is I'm taking that all of the devices failed now. If I was to go back and just use the webinar card, just take a whole bunch of devices, and then I was to say I'm specifically looking for, I'm deliberately making memory fail in this particular instance. I'm missing some sessions. It does look like I'm failing on more devices in general, like from a metric comparison. So just isolating memory. So from this view here, I could look at multiple metrics failing at the same time. So it could be here that I put the FPS up to great, and I can see the FPS failures across here, and then the memory failures. If I want to see what those particular sessions were or devices, I just click on the number, and it takes me to a list of where we're failing. And let's say, as you can see from the top line, the S21 Ultra 5G had a failure on the FPS and the memory at the same time. So yeah, it would sometimes hard to break down each metric and then bring it all together so you can see things together.
No problem. We've got a hand up from Stephen. Stephen Ann. And I think there you are. You want to unmute and welcome and ask your question, Stephen. Welcome.
I think you're still on mute.
Okay. Stephen? Okay, well, maybe we'll come back to Stephen. Osman, our new best friend. Osman, can you come in and ask the question which you asked at the beginning about the injection into the browser APK? Welcome back.
Hi, Andrew. And I'm giving you a hard time today, but
that's good.
Private session. Okay, so basically my question is, because we based on web-based games and it's running on your Chrome browser, is Safari or DuckDuckGo or whatever, can the SDK be injected into the browsers? So, if we run automation, we can get an understanding of how our games are working on those browsers.
Yeah, browsers are difficult because they come with the phone. So the OS probably wouldn't run the browser because it is signed within the phone. What you'd have to do is you'd have to use something like the Android app or the desktop app to do your session recording, unfortunately.
Okay, maybe it's something you can look forward to providing us a solution in the future.
Yeah, I mean, like if we targeted specifically, I guess we'd do it more in the web code rather than the browser itself. So the SDK was originally designed obviously as a sort of code compilable. So we could look at like a more web-based sort of SDK for this.
Or you make it like a proxy.
Proxies don't tend to work well on mobile devices. They yeah, it's just some of the security as well. It's caused us problems before in the past while trying to do packet interceptions, things like that. But it's something we can look at. We'll see how our roadmaps go. I can't promise anything.
Question. I just want to jump in because we're ruthless on time at GameBench in every area, but particularly with our webinars. I just got a question from Stephen Ann's come in, which is great. Thanks, Stephen. Stephen's asking any advice on iOS heat and battery testing.
So we have, I'm pretty sure we have heat, or we're looking at it right now on the iOS side, on the SDK. So we are having that in the SDK.
Super. Battery testing, anything on that?
Battery testing. So we have power. Obviously, with power, you want to be unplugged from the machine, and then we recommend at least a session over 20 minutes or at least over 15. But you're going to get the best power readings over time because obviously the phone can go into different states of power saving dependent on like how it's feeling that day, basically. So you could be doing your power testing with a full battery and your power testing below 30%, and you might get different performance readings. So from a device perspective, like if you've got the SDK integrated or injected, then obviously test the battery under different conditions.
Super. Fantastic. My phone rings and everything goes on at the same time. I think, should we wrap, Andrew? Have you got some final points to make?
Yeah, just a reiteration. This dashboard first release is going to come out in 2 weeks. Anyone who's interested, please get in contact because we want to roll out to specific users at a time. So if you want to start early with this and you want to get to grips with it before the rest of your company, then we can unlock it for you to be able to guide people through the process of the changes as they come out. So please get in contact, support or directly to me. If you have any questions or features that you'd like, obviously get in contact with myself, and I can look at the roadmap and see how we can get those features in there for you. I'm always keen to hear how you're using our tools and the areas where things are not so easy for you to do the testing efficiently.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. I'm aware that we have an outstanding question from Emil Danstorm. Emil, really sorry we didn't get to you. The question is quite a rich one, and I'm just going to mention it. We're not going to answer it, but I figured we could use about another half hour. How did you reach the conclusion that 29 FPS is good? I think that's a whole webinar right there. So, Emil, can we connect with you? We'll ping you an email and connect with you on that one online, because I think we need a lot of time to deal with that one.
Yeah, feel free to drop me an email and I'll have to answer that one.
Super. So we are done, and just leaves for me to close the session. Thank you everyone for sitting in and for your great questions. Thanks to Andrew, great presentation, and also for the invaluable Adele Tibier for running the back end for us. The recording of today will be shared with you all shortly. Now, here's the thing: you'll see a link in the chat, which I encourage you to click on. Our next webinar will be around this. We'll be focusing around our recent work for Google on the brand new cloud gaming Chromebooks, which have just been released. These are the first laptops ever built specifically for that purpose. And as you know, we've been doing, as you don't know, but as I'm about to tell you, we've been doing the testing and benchmarking on those. So there's a link to this week's announcement from Google in that chat right now. So that'll be the subject matter of our next webinar. And so keep an eye on your inboxes for details. Thank you again. And we look forward to seeing everyone again very soon. Thank you very much.